Thanks so much, Joel, and good morning, afternoon, evening. Welcome wherever you are in the world, and thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm really delighted to be able to join this webinar to honor World Disability Day with a conversation that's centered around progress and inclusion and the work ahead. Today's webinar brings together advocates, allies, and communities that are committed to advancing rights around the world. And we're really privileged to be joined today by two remarkable speakers whose voices and vision have shaped the disability rights landscape in important ways. And you'll be hearing from those folks in a moment. Today's conversation really invites us to look back as well as ahead. We honor the legacy of the really groundbreaking Americans with Disabilities Act, a landmark civil rights law that transformed expectations around access, opportunity, and equality. And we also acknowledge that in creating the future we want of access and equity for all, it means that we continue to connect and engage and empower communities to ensure that accessibility keeps pace with emerging technologies, global mobility, and social challenges. So thank you for being part of this conversation today and for your commitment to a more accessible and equitable world. Together, we honor the progress that brought us here and look at what it will take to protect and expand it. And with that, it's my pleasure to hand over to the chair of the Democrats Abroad Disability Caucus, Marnie Delaney of DA France.
Thanks, Martha, and thank you so much for being here today. I have to introduce a couple of great people to you. We have the extraordinary opportunity to hear from two important voices that were mentioned. Tony Coelho, former Congressman Tony Coelho is here with us, the author of the ADA, and I want to tell you a little bit first about him. He spent 6 terms in Congress, where he was the first Hispanic American to serve as majority whip. He never hesitated to assert his opinion about being a Democrat, saying, politics reminds me of driving a car. You put it in D and you go forward, you put it in R and you go backwards. And never have we seen such evidence that he was correct, I must say, lately. Tony graduated with a BA from Loyola University of Los Angeles, now Loyola Marymount University, in 1964. At Loyola, he was elected student body president during his senior year. During his first campaign for Congress, after more than a decade working for Congressman Bernie Sisk, Coelho's opponent asked how people would feel if Coelho went to a meeting at the White House and had a seizure. The press called me and the good Lord was with me. Coelho later related, off the top of my head, I said, well, in the 13 years I have served in Washington, I knew a lot of people who went to the White House and had fits. At least I'd have an excuse. In November 1978, Coelho was elected to the 96th Congress. He was later elected to 5 succeeding Congresses where he served until his resignation on June 15th in 89. He served on the Agriculture, Interior, Veterans Affairs, and Administration committees during his tenure. However, he specialized in the rights, thanks from all of us, he specialized in the rights of disabled people. Congressman Coelho was at the center of making the ADA happen. He is credited as author, primary sponsor, and leader of the bipartisan movement that led to a victory changing the lives of 1 in 4 Americans with disabilities. In 1990, he enjoyed what I have to imagine was one of the best days of his life when it was passed with broad bipartisan support. We'd like to reiterate our thanks, Tony, and promise our commitment to preserving and expanding on all your work. And our next guest is Sarah Minkara, is a former ambassador-level U.S. diplomat and global strategist who advises Fortune 500 executives and senior government leaders on disability, authentic leadership, and innovation. Appointed by President Biden as the U.S. Special Advisor on International Disability Rights, she integrated disability across U.S. foreign policy in more than 70 countries and created the Disability Rights Playbook, a unified framework for embedding disability within foreign policy priorities across bureaus, embassies, and senior leadership. She advanced disability perspectives in key global arenas, including AI and digital economies, climate, trade, and peace and security. She also led the U.S. delegation to the G7 Disability Ministerial and elevated disability through APEC, ASEAN, and the C5, C5 plus one. Sarah is the creator of In the Dark, a blindfolded experiential methodology that accelerates decision making, strengthens communication, and builds high trust leadership across global organizations, corporations, and institutions. Through her independent advisory practice, well, she guides public and private sector leaders on embedding disability within strategy, risk, operations, and emerging demands. She's developed and is teaching the first ever course on disability and diplomacy at Georgetown University, advancing a new academic and policy frontier and equipping future diplomats with the tools to advance disability in foreign policy, which I think we're going to talk about a little bit. Previously, Sarah founded and led Empowerment Through Integration, a global nonprofit expanding opportunities for youth with disabilities in the Middle East and North Africa. As she's a graduate of Wellesley and Harvard's Kennedy School, Sada's work has been recognized by Forbes 30 Under 30, the Clinton Global Initiative, Vital Voices, and the MIT Ideas Award. Thank you both. Thank you both so much for being here. So now I'm going to ask you some questions. And I think if I ask it of one of you and the other one decides they'd like to pipe in, please just do so. I don't want to lose any great thoughts. First of all, I would like to ask both of you about your experiences growing up, of becoming aware of the idea of an experience of disability, how your understanding of that evolved over time, and where you are today, where you landed. And whatever part of that you want to address, obviously you don't have to tell us your entire life story. But Sarah, would you like to go first?
Sure. Yeah. Well, first of all, Marnie, thank you for bringing us together. And it's so good to be with you, Tony, as well, and for everyone here on International Day of Persons with Disabilities. So to answer your question, I think for me, my understanding of disability evolved over time. So I lost my eyesight when I was 7 years old, and my sister as well. And I think at that time, we saw our disability more just from a technical point. I think when you're young, your kids, your parents, and especially my mom, focused on making sure we continued going to the public school systems. She advocated and pushed the schools to make sure we were getting the resources to study and be able to excel in our classes. And I think so early on, it was just seen more from a technical lens. Over time, it evolved to be seen more from an identity lens, to actually be embraced from a point of this is part of who I am. There's so much strength and value in my blindness and my disability. Um, and also over time, it evolved in terms of becoming my purpose in life, in terms of what I wanted to focus on, because I realized that most kids with disabilities all over the world are not seen, they're not heard, they're not valued, they're pushed to the side. And I think there's so much lost to the world because in terms of the narrative towards disability. So I think for me, it shaped who I am, it shaped my purpose, it shaped kind of how I saw disability. And I think there's so much, for me at this point, there's so much pride in terms of having a disability.
Yeah, good for you. Yay. So, Tony, do you have some history that you could share with us?
I sure do, Marnie. Sarah, nice to be with you again. Um, well, I started off when I grew up on a dairy farm, and so one day I'm in the barn milking, and all of a sudden I wake up and I'm in the bed at home. My brother had carried me into the house, and doctor came out and basically told my parents he thought that I had just had a seizure. My parents, being Catholic and Portuguese, uh, felt that if you have epilepsy, you're possessed by the devil. And that's taught in a lot of different cultures, not just Portuguese. But anyhow, they took me to two other doctors. They said the same thing. When you're 16 or 17, doctors don't talk to you, they talk to your parents. So I had no idea what the doctors were saying. It's just that my parents said that they didn't know, and so I had to go to another doctor. And then after the third doctor, then we got into it. We went to witch doctors. And so I went to three different witch doctors. The most interesting one was that he said, take a raw egg, put it in your armpit, hold it there for an hour. And when it comes out, if it's black, the evil spirits have left. If it's not, then you still have them. Well, it wasn't black. And so I told my parents that I would not do any more witch doctors, which in effect started my struggle with my parents. And so they started eliminating me from doing things that I normally did. And as a with a dairy, we showed our cattle at fairs. Well, they didn't have me go to the fairs because I'd have a seizure maybe, and people would know that our family was possessed because, or I was possessed because the family had made a major sin at some point, not me, but somebody in the family. So I didn't know any of this stuff till much later. So I'm going through this just thinking that they don't want me to participate or do things. So anyway, I leave and I go to college in Los Angeles to Loyola. And I fell in love with Loyola and the Jesuits, the Catholic priests who ran the university. And I was very active in at the university. I kept on having these passing out spells, as I called them. But after I had it, I'd get up and do my thing, and so forth. So I never thought much about it. It was just that this was the condition I had. And then when I was going to become a trial lawyer, and then Kennedy got assassinated, it had a huge impact on me personally. And I decided that I should do something to help others as opposed to just pursuing a law degree and so on. And at that point, I decided to become a Catholic priest, to the shock of my girlfriend of 5 years and to my fraternity brothers. But I went to my physical, and the doctor said, "Have you ever heard the word epilepsy?" I said, "No." And so he said, "Well, the good news is you're 4F, which means you can't serve in the military." And this is 1964, right in the middle of Vietnam. And he said, the bad news is you can't become a Catholic priest. And the reason is that the Catholic Church in 400 AD amended canon law to say if you have epilepsy or possessed by the devil, you can't be a priest. Now, as a result of that, you understand why there are a lot of cultures who put the two together and feel that epilepsy is possession. And there are a lot of cultures to this day who still feel that. So it's a huge problem that we have in the epilepsy community. So I left there, called my parents, and said, I have good news. The doctor says that I have epilepsy and he can prescribe a drug that helps in regards to those passing out spells and so forth. My mother immediately said, no son of ours has epilepsy. And again, I had no idea what was going on. And so that really caused a problem. They wanted me to come home and so forth. And I said no. And so then I had a lot of job offers as student body president and so forth. And I then filled out the job applications. On every one of them was the word epilepsy. And so I checked the box. I never got one interview, and I must have had 70 different offers, but never got one interview. I realized then that it was checking the box, and so I started drinking every day. And there was I thought there was a mountain, but it's actually a hill in Griffith Park in Los Angeles. And so I would go there and I would drink and I would be drunk by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And I became suicidal, and decided that my life wasn't worth it because of what I was going through. And so then um, the day I was going to do the dirty deed, I decided to, I heard a voice. Let me say that at the bottom of the hill was a merry-go-round. And this voice said to me, you're going to be just like those little kids getting on and off the merry-go-round. You're never going to let anybody or anything stop you from doing what you want to do. And I can still hear that voice. And as a result of that, I got my mojo back. As a result of that, I felt like I could participate, I could do things, and so forth. A week later, and one of the priests came to me and said, "We have an opportunity for you to live with Bob Hope." And a lot of you are young and don't know who Bob Hope is, but Hope was a very famous TV comedian. And so I lived with he and his family for a year. And he suggested one day, he said, your problem is you think you have a ministry and it can't be practiced in a church. And true ministry is practiced in sports, entertainment, government, business, and where you belong is in politics. And so I was a little surprised, but I thought, what the heck, why not? So I wrote a letter to my congressman. He was looking for somebody young with a agriculture background. I happened to fill the bill and I got the job and did it for 13 years. So that's how I started. That discrimination had an impact with me. And that's what set up what I've done in the future. So that's sort of the background, Marnie, how I got there.
It's quite a background. It's a good story too. I mean, it's quite. Both of you have mentioned your parents, and it's astonishing the role that they can play in well in our futures, which is, I guess, supposed to be their job. But um, yeah, Sarah, I imagine that you have had a lot of opportunities to experience or hear stories about ableism. And it's a word I don't think a lot of people maybe know or know what it means. So can you give us your definition of what it means and what ableism does to people,
Mhm.
and maybe how it, things we could do to do away with it.
Mm. I want to mention first two stories to kind of illustrate what I when I talk about ableism, and I want us to really understand that ableism can manifest in so many different ways, in very much in your face ways and in very subtle ways. But two stories that really illustrate. So in one of my travels when I was in government, in one of the embassies, I won't mention the country because I don't want to reveal this person's kind of who that person is, but she's a local staff for an embassy in a country, and she was born without a hand. And when she was born without a hand, the doctor turns to the mother and tells her, you know, you have the option to send your kid to an institution or an orphanage or whatever. You don't need to take care of her. But this mother was like, no, I'm gonna keep my baby. I'm gonna keep my daughter. And this baby, this daughter grew up to be an amazing woman, but she grew up understanding or thinking and believing there's something wrong with her. So she grew up training herself to hide her disability. So she would put her arm in her pocket, and no one would realize or know that she doesn't have a hand. And the embassy colleagues did not even know she had a disability. She did not have a hand. And one night, before I left the country, at dinner, she comes to me. She's like, "Sada, I want to tell my story, and I want to share my story of my disability." And finally, she tells the story, and her embassy colleagues, that was the first time they ever learned about her disability. But again, how much that narrative impacted her and impacted how she saw herself and how society told her there's something wrong with you. Another story, when I was running my nonprofit organization, we would, we would work in countries like Lebanon, and one of the one of the things that we did is we would train blind and visually impaired kids how to use a cane, so they can become more independent and life skill training, all that kind of stuff. And one of the parents came to me, and this goes back to your point, Marnie. Parents can be the best enablers or disablers for their kids. And this parent came to me and said, Sada, I don't want my kid to learn how to use a white cane. I don't want them to be out in society with a white cane. I don't want them to be labeled as disabled. I would rather, and for her, she saw this more as I'm going to protect my kid. But again, that signals to the kid that there's something wrong with me. I should not have a white cane, and that diminishes their ability to be more independent, all these different things, and on and on. Again, but ableism manifests in so many different ways. To Tony's point, there's still cultures and spaces in society where people with disabilities are seen as cursed. Um, and possessed. There's still shackling that happens in different parts of the world. And even in subtle ways here, even here in the US, where we're either seen from an inspiration porn perspective. Oh my God, you're so inspiring. Why? Just because I have a disability and I'm living my life. Or we are seen when it comes to, employment. And there's a story of this amazing guy. I would look him up. His name is Neil. He's British. He founded 19 successful ventures, but when he wanted to start working for a big corporation, he never was able to get a job. And people would respond to him and say, "Oh, you're inspiring," but even though he was qualified and overqualified for most jobs. So ableism manifests in different ways and it will impact us. And I will say the narratives that we see in disability, it's either the charity pity narrative, the inspiration porn narrative, oh my God, you're so courageous, you're brave, or whatever, or the social protection narrative, which is I want to take care of you. I want to make sure and for me, I would always say, I don't want you to look at me from that lens. I just want you to break down barriers in society so I can exist like anyone else and contribute and bring forward my value and my contributions. So do not see me from a pity lens. Do not see me from an inspiration porn lens. Social protection should be provided to anyone as humans across the board and our rights. I want you to break down barriers and don't break down barriers because you see it as a special thing or we're vulnerable, whatever. Break down barriers because we have to contribute. We have so much to contribute. So that's how I see ableism manifest.
Wow. Actually, you mentioned a couple things that I had never even thought about. So thank you. I think ableism as a concept that it's important that we make sure people understand so that they can get on the road to understanding how to stop it even
Tony,
in themselves. Yeah, yeah.
I have a comment I want to make based on what Sarah talked about. And that is, as I speak to a lot of different companies and so forth about jobs, I always say, in regards to employment, if you give me the opportunity to fail, then I can succeed. And the reason I say that is that if you never give me a job, I can never succeed. I can't learn. People say you don't have experience, and so I can't hire you. So I just say, look at you give an opportunity to fail to people who aren't disabled. And a lot of them fail, some of them succeed. Why don't you do the same thing for us? And
So,
when I was lobbying for the ADA in Britain, I went to a chamber meeting there and was promoting the ADA, and they were questioning, about disabilities. And as I looked around the room, I noticed something. And I took off my glasses, which I was wearing at the time. I took off my glasses and I said, I noticed that most of you in this room have an accommodation. And they're sort of looking at each other. And I said, take off your glasses. It's an accommodation. Now put them back on and you can see like everybody else, but that's an accommodation. And so if you look at accommodations in a negative way, understand what you're talking about and so forth. So ableism is a huge problem for us in our community. And the only way that Sarah and I can help break that down is to talk about it. If you don't talk about it, it'll never be resolved.
yeah. and speak up. I always say you should speak up when it's happening. I think sometimes people go, well, I don't want to embarrass somebody or whatever, but there are ways, polite ways of saying things. But yeah, that's when you're going to have people really realize, at least to me, realize, what the nature of what they said and how hurtful it can be.
And one
Okay. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry, just one thing to what Tony said and to what you said. Actually, Tony, I love what you said about the glasses.
Yeah.
I always tell sighted people, hey, you guys have light. We provide light in society. If you want to look at it, that's an accommodation. You want to look at it from a special needs to you in some ways, right? Like it's all about how we frame things and look at things. We give it as a given, providing these different things. So I think to your point, for us, when you break down barriers, it's not a special thing. It provides a system that works better for everyone. And then Martin, just still your last point, you know, having more of these conversations and these difficult conversations, and to Tony's point, speaking up. And also, how do we do more of that through the entertainment industry, through the media sector? Really engaging more social media and media entertainment to really bring forward more of the narrative and disrupting the ableism narrative in our entertainment and media and social media, etc. I think there's so much work to be done. I think Britain has done a better job on the entertainment side. I think there's still so much more work to be done on that front.
Yeah, and in regards to that, Marnie, is that uh, if you think about in the United States with television, we broke down a lot of barriers in regards to the Black community with Jeffersons. We broke down a lot of barriers in regards to gays in regards to that TV show. And women, when you had the three women comedians and so forth, you broke down a lot of barriers in regards to women. Now, what is the most constant thing in that is the writers built in those accommodations for each of those issues. We don't have writers who write in the accommodations for the disability community. If somebody is in a wheelchair, it's generally an actor who isn't using a chair, who pretends that they are in a chair. And that is a real problem for our community because the way to break down barriers is to have us play the role of somebody who has a disability when we have that same disability. And so getting writers to do it is something that I've been working on for a long time, making a little progress, but not enough.
Yeah. Well, good. Keep it up. We'll try and help. I want to get back to the ADA for a second, Tony. As you were the author and writer of the author and the pusher of the ADA, and I wondered what was the most controversial part of it that either made it or didn't make it, and what was the biggest fight, and then maybe are there things that you would like to see added now or mended at this point in time, given the changes in the nature of our world, especially technology?
Let me start with your last part first, and that is uh, changes. I'm very concerned about opening up the ADA, particularly in this political climate. I think we would lose the ADA. And as far as I'm concerned, we can't afford as a community to lose it. Is it perfect? No. Does it need some correction or some modifications? Yes. But we have to do it when there's an atmosphere that supports the basic things of our rights as those of us with disabilities. And so if you create an opportunity for us to lose our rights, shame on you. So I've been fighting this for a long time because people say we got to open it up, we got to do this, we got to do that. And so I fight that all the time. Now, in regards to the blind, hearing impaired, physically impaired community, I led an effort to make sure that those communities had access to the internet. And for during the pandemic, we realized that those communities couldn't do finances, couldn't order food, couldn't do anything else that other people did. You had to get somebody who didn't have your disability in order to get it done. So it took a whole effort. We organized the whole disability community to help out the blind, hearing impaired, physically impaired community. We had over 100 different organizations pushing it. It took a long time. It took basically 13 years that I worked on it. We got it through in the Biden administration. Now it's a rule that is in effect part of the law. And so that will take some time to go through. People are fighting it. The rule that we got passed impacts state and local and federal government. It does not impact business. We got through the amendment to Title II. I won't get too much in the weeds, but Title III is business. We could not get it done for business because the large companies, Microsoft and so forth, would have fought it. So we went for the one that we could get. And in another administration, not this one, in another administration, we'll go after Title III. But let me go back to the ADA. And ADA, our biggest issue was getting the disability, getting the business community to understand that the accommodations weren't going to be that expensive. We put in law something that never before, and that was economically feasible. The accommodations had to be economically feasible. For example, on a ramp, if it's to a mom and pop store, it can be made out of plywood and 2x4s. If it's McDonald's hamburgers, it has to be a true ramp, and you have to pay for it. So economically feasible is a term now in the law, and that we put in deliberately for that. Number two, so the business community was our real problem. The one in the business community who fought us all the way was Greyhound motor bus owners, and they fought us all the way. And we got through the leadership in the House of Representatives fought the bill, tried to get me to break it apart. It was too big, and so forth.
Mhm.
I refused to do that, and so the leadership then assigned it to, I think, 5 or 7 different committees and then a bunch of subcommittees. So we worked out the strategy and go through the most favorable, and we worked it all the way through. Public Works was the last one, and that's transportation. That's where the motor bus owners were. And we got it through. The chairman of that committee was a congressman, the transportation subcommittee was a congressman from California, Norm Mineta, who is Japanese American. And I had helped when I was whip, I had helped the Japanese American community get the Reparations Act through based on what happened to them, unfortunately, during World War II. And so that happened. So he's now got this, and we know it's really close. So I called up Norm and I said, Norm, remember the Japanese Reparations Act that I helped? He said, of course. And I said, I want you to know that the ADA is my Reparations Act. And he supported us. We got it through on a 21-20 vote. So that was our biggest thing. Now, what would I like to see in there that didn't happen was the religious communities. And, if you are Catholic, as I am, you go to these churches and it's all steps. And
Mhm.
it's some churches, in effect, have set up ramps to have people get in, but it's all steps. And but if we had tried to include churches, we would have never gotten it through. And I know that, so we didn't do it. But that's my biggest one because if you had that situation, the ministers, the priests, the rabbis could all talk about disability because they had to be required to do it. They don't. Some ministers today preach against disabilities or preach against our accommodations and so forth. So that is my biggest negative in regards to the ADA. There are others, but that's the biggest one. The second one is in regards to employment. And ADA is a civil rights bill. It basically says that if you violate my civil rights, I can take action. Employment is not a civil rights. Employment is basically telling people that they have to hire different people. They can't discriminate. So that separation is there. But what we've done is we, in a lot of legislation, have made uh, the area, and the way we get to it is by saying, and I go back a minute, and pardon my rumbling here a minute, but go back to who you vote for president. They then appoint the attorney general. The attorney general appoints the head of the Civil Rights Division. The Civil Rights Division can go after a company or can go after a state or federal government if they are not hiring people with disabilities. We can't go after individual rights and so forth. So that is the distinction there, and I wish we could make it stronger, but we can't. But anyway, I don't want the ADA opened up, is the bottom line.
That's good. Well, let's not let that happen. So, Sarah, since we're talking about stuff happening in Washington, D.C., maybe you could share a little bit of your experience working with the Biden administration, the good, the bad, or the ugly, and tell us about the really innovative disability playbook that you brought to the table while you were there.
Hmm. Really good question, Marnie. And just one thing, just to kind of touch on something that Tony did mention, is
Yes.
the faith-based communities. I think that's such an important community that needs to be engaged on the disability front, from both the physical access to the curriculum to the narrative across the board. And I think there's so much more to be done. And when I was in government, that's one of the communities that we engaged. We engaged with the Vatican, we engaged with the Azhar University, we engaged with just a wide range of different kind of faith-based spaces, because again, going back to the ableism and narrative, if the narrative is addressed there, because a lot of people go to their faith-based spaces to find hope, to find, community, and if that narrative is addressed there, it can really create a ripple effect of positive impact. So just wanted to share that. But Marty, to your question, so yeah, I had the privilege to have been the U.S. Special Advisor on International Disability Rights. So this actually position was established under President Obama, who at that time appointed the amazing, may she rest in peace, Judy Heumann. And the first Trump administration didn't appoint anyone, and until now, this administration hasn't appointed anyone. And the role is to, how do you advance disability into our U.S. foreign policy priorities? And one of the things that we focus a lot on is how do we advance disability into spaces that are not thought of, whether we're looking at disability and trade, whether disability and peace and security. So we actually, during the last year that when I was in government, we attended the Munich Security Conference. And it was one of the first time that disability was even part of those spaces. Whether we're looking at disability in AI or digital economic transitioning, there's a lot of different spaces and multi-lat spaces that they're negotiating, for instance, a digital economic framework agreement, and disability and AI or disability accessibility is not even part of those negotiations. So those are the spaces we really targeted, and really, especially on the economic side of things. So for instance, we had gone out to the East Africa AmCham Business Summit. It was like a couple of years ago, and brought business leaders and government leaders to talk about, just the private and the government sector coming together on economic development in East Africa. And disability was not even mentioned once in any of the dialogues and conversations. So again, those are the spaces that we focused on. Something that I'm very proud of in terms of what we were able to accomplish, with Minister Locatelli, who is the Minister of Disability of Italy. We were able to launch the first ever G7 disability ministerial meeting. So it was a level of ministers, and it was a huge outcome. This was last year. But there's so much more work still to be done on that front. I think, how do we continue keeping the momentum on the G7 disability ministerial meeting? I don't think Canada hosted anything this year. We'll see about France next year. But also, how do we keep mainstreaming disability into the other ministerial meetings and other dialogues? Because they will have dialogues on AI and trade and climate, energy. Disability needs to be part of every single one of those spaces. So that's just one example. We brought disability into the C5+1, which is the Central Asian countries in the US, engage on energy, security, economic development, etc. We were able to get President Biden to announce that disability was one of the priorities in terms of that region. So, but again, I think one of our biggest challenge was getting colleagues, both internally, but also externally to see disability more than just a human rights issue, which it is a human rights issue, but it's an economic issue, it's a political issue, it's a public affairs issue. It's an issue that should be part of every single space. So when we used to travel, and one of the things in my first meetings on the ground, I would meet with the embassy team and the leadership team of the embassy, the U.S. embassy, and I would turn around to every single person in that meeting, and I would ask them and say, I don't want you to tell me right now what you're doing on disability, but what I want you to share is what are your top three priorities, and how do you see disability fit into those top three priorities, and what does success look like? And for some people, they're like, well, I mean, my top three priorities is X, Y, and Z. I don't know how disability can fit in. But that was the exercise that we did in the conversations we did. And it was all about reframing how we looked at disability and how it integrated into the wide range of work that our embassy colleagues did. And that's where the playbook was born out of that point of how do we get every single bureau, department, embassy, sections to really think about disability in their own work and integrate it there.
That's great. You may, I remember you said somewhere, I heard probably a TED Talk or something. I heard you talking about how people always talk about the cost of help of making the accommodations, and you said something. You quoted a number and said a couple things on that, which I'd love to hear you share.
Really good point. So, when people with disabilities are excluded from the economy, it can impact our GDP up to 7%. That's pretty significant. And I would say if people are seeing us as a cost when it comes to building an accessible infrastructure, breaking down barriers, or whatever it is, that's a cost in the short term, but long term, much more long term gain in the in the future. Reverse that. If you don't break down the barriers for us, you're gonna create so much more cost in the long term. And we become more burdens on the system because we're not able to access and contribute, but you're also losing out on our contribution and our value, and it will impact the GDP. And we need to keep societies understanding and seeing that. So for instance, let's look at Ukraine there's been multiple Ukraine recovery conferences, recovery and pre-construction conferences, and there's a lot of conversations about rebuilding green Ukraine. And I would say it's not just green Ukraine. Let's make sure it's green and accessible Ukraine. Because if you have the opportunity to rebuild Ukraine and you don't think about accessibility from the get-go, then you're losing out on so much for the long term.
Marty,
Yeah.
let me tell a story
Yes,
on
please.
international. Um, as as I indicated earlier, I was denied entry into the priesthood because of my epilepsy and canon law. So when I became the whip, the third highest position in our government, when I was in Congress, I got to take a foreign trip, and take a delegation with me. And so the first country I wanted to go to was Portugal, of course, because that's red carpet, state dinner, speak to the parliament, all those wonderful things. And I was the highest ranking Portuguese American, so that was all big deal. Secondly, I got to go to Morocco and meet with the king because Morocco was working with Portugal in regards to issues in the Middle East, and the State Department wanted me to pass something on to the king. And that's an interesting story in itself, but not dealing with disabilities. But then the third country I wanted to go to was the Vatican. And the Vatican is a country, by the way, in case people question it. But I went to the Vatican, and my deal was that if I went there, I wanted to see the Pope. And so I took my whole delegation. We got to the Vatican, and Pope John Paul came through the door. He's now a saint, as most of you know. And so he came through the door. We all stand up. He comes in, he sits down. Everybody sits down, and I get up and I go to the podium. Now, I take the view that a podium is anytime you have the attention of a group of people. It can be a steel, wood, whatever, but anytime you get up and you have the attention of people, that's your podium. So I go to the podium and I read a very boring speech that the State Department, the Vatican, and my office have put together. I read it and I get through with it, and I then say, Your Holiness, I could not live with myself if I didn't say something personal. And I could hear the minions around the room going, because that's a no-no. You're not supposed to do that. And my delegation didn't know, and so forth. And so I said, as a young man, I decided I want to become a Catholic priest. I was denied entry because I have epilepsy, and canon law, amended in 400 AD, said if you have epilepsy or possessed by the devil, you can't be a priest. I think that's very unchristian of our church, and I wish you'd look into it. And I sat down. He then spoke, and he didn't mention my comments at all. He read his very boring pre-approved speech. And then we took pictures, a bunch of pictures and all that stuff. And then he took my wife's hand and we walked him to the door. So we got to the door, he turned to her and blessed her. Well, that's very traditional in the Catholic Church. And he turned to me and did not bless me. And he said, however, young man, I heard your comments. And he turned around and walked off. Now, that was between my wife, he, and myself. And I thought, I'm going straight to hell because he's not happy with me. And so I sort of, just sort of ignored it to a great extent, but I was not happy. Um, 2 years later, I find out, and I don't know when it happened, but 2 years later, I find out that canon law was amended to get rid of the provision in regards to people with epilepsy becoming priests. Now, that's one of my great accomplishments, I think, ADA, of course, being one. But I don't know if I did it. The reason I say this story is I just want to know people to know that you should speak to power if there's something wrong. If you have an opportunity to speak to power, you should. Now, I've spoken up to 5 different presidents, but I spoke up to the Pope, and that's the big one. And so I just want to tell that story because you can make change if you're willing to speak up. You can get something done if you're willing to speak up.
Tony, that's amazing. I'm just snapping. That's such a beautiful, powerful story. It really warmed my heart. That's amazing. Sorry, I just wanted to snap, but yeah.
No.
Thank you.
I'm sort of my jaw is hanging down because I don't know that I would have the courage to to do that. But I think you're right. We need to encourage people to do just that, and to do it up the ladder to whoever most powerful person they can get to, and ask for the most they can ask for, and maybe we can make some really good difference.
Well,
I wanted to ask. Oh, so
Marty, but by the way, I've gotten letters from people who have epilepsy who are now priests. So it's great to see that.
that is cool. Oh my gosh,
Go
that
ahead.
is making a difference in the world and getting to find out about it. That's good stuff. So, um, a wise man whose initials happen to be TC once said, "All struggles for justice are interconnected. We must stand together." And I was going to ask both of you if you had any thoughts on it that you'd want to share about the need for collaboration, for cooperation, and for action among and between the advocacy groups, because sometimes I think we damage each other by competing, I guess is what I would call it. So, anybody want to go first?
Who'd you say, Sarah? Have Sarah go first. I just,
Have Sarah go first.
and
Sarah?
I'll follow up, or Sarah, if you want me to go. I'm
Sure,
not.
I can go first. I mean, I think, you know, there's so much more power that comes from, collaboration across the different advocacy group. And I think, and what when you ask the question, what came to mind immediately is how do you also get mainstream advocacy groups, civil societies whether they're women rights or democracy rights or whatever it is, how do you get more of those mainstream organizations to bring in the disability community and the disability lens? Because when I travel the world, and one of the things that I would always ask is to meet with mainstream civil society and advocacy groups, whether they're working on gender-based violence, addressing gender-based violence or democracy, and there was always a gap in terms of not bringing in the disability community, breaking down barriers so their voices can be heard and be part of those conversations. And I think I mean, there has been a lot of efforts on that, but there's so much more to be done. And the more that we can come together, and the more that we can really support each other, the better. And for me, what really comes to mind, especially, is during moments of crisis, when a community, a region, country is dealing with crisis, whether it's a climate crisis, a conflict crisis, how do we ensure that organizations of persons with disabilities are brought into the broader fabric in terms of the implementing partners and the other organizations, and the disability lens is at the table? Because if it's not, then there's severe consequences, and people with disabilities are disproportionately impacted.
I was nodding vigorously during all of that. That's really good points. How about Tony? You're the one that
Yeah, let
started
me
all this with your quote.
let me uh, address that from a positive side.
Okay.
And that is when the community gets together, we can be very, very effective. And I'll go the examples. ADA. If we didn't have the whole community working on ADA, we never would have gotten it. We had people around the country pushing an ADA, and it was all different disabilities. And if we got it through, I will say, I worked hard on it, but I will say if it wasn't for grassroots, we would have never gotten it because they put pressure on members of the House and members of the Senate. The second thing was that the Supreme Court ruled that the ADA did not cover intellectual disabilities and other disabilities you couldn't see. And so 10 years after that, we then got through the ADA Amendments Act. And the ADA Amendments Act covers all disabilities. The interesting thing there is that Papa Bush did ADA and W. Bush signed the ADA Amendments Act. So kind of an interesting little tidbit. But then take pre-existing conditions. When in Obamacare, the whole issue was we had pre-existing conditions. And that's that those of us who have pre-existing conditions should be able to qualify for health care. We didn't before. And so Obamacare basically did that. That was a huge fight. There was an attempt on the House floor to eliminate pre-existing from the bill, and the whole community came together and made it a huge issue. And to a great extent, even as a result of that today, people in the Congress are afraid to go after pre-existing conditions, although they'd like to because of the costs and so forth. So, but pre-existing is an example. In regards to access to the internet, which I talked about, we got that through because of the community was supportive. I'm chair of a group called Partnership to Improve Patient Care. And we got with the hearing community, blind community, the physically impaired community, we had a meeting every week in developing strategy over a 2-year period. And we had over 100 disability groups working to get that done, and we got it done. Then let's talk about mental health, gun violence. Every time there's gun violence, people say it's because they have mental health and we should get away, do punish people and so forth and so on. And so we have to fight that and the community comes together. So my point is, I don't think we come together as much as we should, but we can't be negative. We do come together at times when we convince people it is something that's broad-based.
Great. That's great. Listen, I could probably talk to you for another day or two, but we have some people that might like to ask some questions that are in our audience, and so I would ask those people to make the questions as concise as they can. But Art Shankler, who is chair of our senior caucus, and Karen Lee who's a steering committee member of both the senior and the disability caucuses, are going to share those questions with you just for a little bit, grab a little bit more of your time. And again, thank you for letting me blather on here. It's you guys are terrific, terrific. Thanks. You can I just say I'm going to say one more thing. I think that you you are the example that you are the examples of the kind of people we need in Washington and elsewhere who are who are human based, that are humane, that understand that you know what's important and what's not important, and understand how a community does best for the people in it. And I salute you for that, and I can only hope that I can do a teensy a bit of that stuff myself. So anyway, I'm going to introduce you to Art and Karen, and I guess maybe Art will go first.
Yeah, there aren't any questions, I think, in the box yet, but I'll ask one if that's
Yeah.
okay. But before I do, since you mentioned President Bush, both president, I just wanted to say that I was in the White House a couple of years ago, no recent invitations, but and walking down the hallway of the East Wing, may it rest in peace, there was a photograph on the wall of President Bush signing the ADA. You were in the background or standing next to him. I hope that they have rescued that photo from the rubble and it will find its place again.
Who knows,
Anyway,
Art?
speaking of which, all that being said, I wonder if both of you could talk about what has happened over the last year and what cutbacks we have seen, you have seen or recognize, and what's being done by the Trump administration, the Republicans in Congress, who maybe not quite so bipartisan as they once were during your day. I think I read, this in the Department of Education, they've cut back funding for people. So maybe you could talk about that because we are a political organization and we want people to vote and turn those guys out. But anyway, go ahead, please. Either one of you or both.
Sarah, you want me to go first? Um, I think the thing to recognize is that the current president of the United States has made fun of our community several times. He, of course, mimicked a reporter in the way that he was talking and handling his body and so forth. He just last week called the governor of Minnesota a retard, a name that we eliminated, and it's wrong to repeat that word, except the current president doesn't care and is not willing to accept us as a community and respect us and so forth. So that is a major concern because our having the president of the United States make fun of us gives credibility to other people to make fun of us. And we put, in my view, we put hate in the bottle a long time. And we closed the lid. Hate could not be cured, but it was in a bottle. He took the lid off the bottle, and hate is back. And hate is something that I think has to be addressed, but is a huge problem. And so he wants to get rid of the Department of Education, which eliminates the disability programs. It all goes to the states. Well, we know as well as you do that some states won't do anything and other states will. That's the thing that we try to have done is have the United States do what's right in regards to those of us with disabilities. Now there are going to be some states that basically, like what's happened with abortion, that you can go to some states to do X, but you can't go to others if you have a certain disability in regards to education. It's also happening in healthcare. And so if we just think about what is happening in this year, these few months, it's amazing. And if you think that it won't continue to happen over the next 3 years, you're wrong. So that's why it's so critically important that all of you that are involved in, if you have family or whatever, vote, because what we have to do is get at least the House of Representatives in Democratic hands so we can be a veto over what the current president is doing. That's critically important. And Art, you're saying your group is political? It is. And all of you have a vote or a right to vote. And it would help us in regards to getting things done.
We have that right for the moment. They're trying to take it away.
Oh, they are, Art. That's
Oh, yeah.
exactly right. But that's with a lot of people, not just us, but it is with a lot of people. Go ahead, Sarah. I'm sorry.
Thanks, Tony, and really good question. So I think I'll speak kind of from the international lens as well. To Tony's point on the rhetoric, on the budget cuts, on the funding cuts. In the past, US has been seen as leaders when it comes to disability inclusion, disability policy, disability accessibility. Yes, there's still more work for us to do, but we have been seen as leaders, and countries would turn to us to look at our practices. Um, and I think in the past year, I think we've lost a lot of credibility. Our budget cuts have impacted our work internationally on the disability front. So one example, our budget cuts when it comes to the UN agencies. Now a lot of UN agencies are now cutting their own. They have to really trim and find ways to deal with these budget cuts. One example, UNHCR, who had a disability point of contact, they've got rid of that position, and now they're saying they're going to mainstream disability. But again, how do they, how do you create accountability in terms of mainstreaming if you don't have people focusing on this? So you have these budget cuts have also impacted organizations like IFES, International Foundation for Electoral Systems, where they're doing a lot of work on democracy and disability democracy. And so our State Department, the global programs, DRL program, global programs was completely gotten rid of, and that included disability programming. Our US aid cuts impacted so much of our work abroad, and including on disability. So there's just so much on that front from funding organizations and efforts. There's the rhetoric, there's the credibility, but there's also, we were involved in the past on G20 and disability, G7 and disability, ASEAN, C5, all these different multilateral spaces. And there's a lot of now gaps in terms of how we're approaching disability and foreign policy. And I think there's been a lot of impact to the disability community, to the efforts, and then also to how we are perceived as a country when it comes to this issue.
Let me just add, Art, something that Sarah said, and that is that when we adopted the ADA, we were basically the first country in the world that basically said those of us with disabilities have rights. And as a result of that, other countries have followed. It's not the same as ADA, but it is an ADA for their country. And so we had over 50 different countries that adopted an ADA type provisions. And now those countries, there are some that are thinking about reneging on what they did. But we as the United States was the leader. We in the United States set the example in the way you treat people with disabilities. That has reversed now, and it has a huge impact internationally.
Thanks. I will say just one of the most galling things that we see living abroad is the statements by the MAGA people that we now have the respect of the rest of the world when we all know the opposite is true. Anyway, Karen, I think you've got a question. Karen Lee is in Greece. Thanks.
and hitting the wrong microphone to get it to unmute. Um, I go back a long ways with it because back in the 70s, I worked in a personal advocacy program in Mansfield, Ohio, where we matched up volunteer advocates one-on-one with people with various disabilities. It was a smaller community, so we did the range from developmental disabilities to mental illness and physical disabilities as well. My coworker, when we would go out on a speaking engagement, used to introduce herself by saying, "I am mathematically challenged." We all have some disability. And it was a winning kind of narrative to begin with. Over the years, things have changed. I find myself now even wondering, what's the right term to use? I don't want to step in it and hurt someone's feelings, but you just don't know anymore. I think a lot of people feel that way. So I guess I'm also wondering about the narrative that we have, that people with disabilities took the bull by the horns, pushed it through, working to get the law through. And that's a very strong kind of statement. Now, as a senior, kind of bouncing back and forth between these two caucuses, I also recognize that disabilities happen to the best of us. Those of us who had 20/20 vision are beginning to lose it. We're losing our hearing, we're losing our hair. Some of us don't get around as well as we did. Sunday, my children were visiting from the States, and they took me to a sanctuary museum out here near Athens and pushed me around the museum in a wheelchair because they weren't sure there would be seating inside when I got tired. And it felt very dependent. At the same time, I note that after the president's gaffe this week, at least one of his followers said, "I'm not voting for your deal in Indiana because I have a daughter who has Down syndrome, and you've just insulted us terribly." So putting that all together, I guess, could you talk a little bit about how we pull in that other 80% of the population that we need to be mindful, understanding, and supportive, who probably have someone in their family or friendship circle who's dealing with something that gives them some extra challenge in life. And maybe we can pull a narrative together that's little, not so sympathetic, but more empathetic and, fellow warriors.
So a couple thoughts as you were speaking. Thank you for sharing, sharing that, and sharing also your own kind of personal experience. I think um, it's really interesting. One of the things I've been reflecting a lot on is how do you, and I wrote a piece about this on my Substack, is how do you get um, people with disabilities, especially people who are aging with disabilities, identify themselves as people with disabilities versus seeing it as a, just part of life and aging, and it's a health issue, right? And it's hard. It's hard for people to see it as an identity as part of who they are. It's hard for them to, and I think this is one of the things that we need to keep kind of building that narrative, because I remember there was someone um in a leadership position, and she was going through, she had some back problems. She had to start using a wheelchair, and for her, she saw that more as a health condition instead of actually, now I have a disability, and calling it as a disability. Um, Disability touches all of us in different ways, whether it's in our family and whether it's as we age, whether it's we have temporary disability. My mom recently, she broke her foot, and for 4 months it was hard for her to walk around. And I think for us, the more that, and I always talk about curiosity through lens of compassion. How do we really turn around to each other and ask and get to know our stories and get to know people's experiences through a lens of compassion? Not, like you said, not sympathy, but more, I would say, more through compassion, and get to know people's story and understand that we as humans, there's so much more commonalities, especially, and disability can be a bridge issue. Disability can actually bring us together. I don't think there's a single family out there that wouldn't want their kids with disabilities to thrive and be integrated, and also people with disabilities, in if they have parents with disabilities, be able to age with dignity, right? And have what they need. I think there's so much more untapped potential and power when it comes to disability being a bridge issue in our country that we should lean into and discuss and have the difficult conversation to really get society to move away from the sympathy, pity, I feel bad for you, but more in terms of this is a part of life. Let's work together so people can live with dignity.
Well, let me follow up with what Sarah said. I happen to agree totally. I'm 83 years old. I've been through a lot over these years. And the one thing I don't want to see happen is people try to think there should be another word for disability. I am very much aggressive in saying that what we should be doing in the disability community is acknowledging our disability openly, because that's the way we educate people. I've been successful in Congress. I've been successful in Wall Street. I've been successful in everything I've done, and I have a disability. And so I don't. I want people to know, and I thank God for my disability because it has made me a stronger, better person. And having to make sure that I feel good about myself, love myself, and that way I can help others by acknowledging my disability. So some people wanted to change the Epilepsy Foundation to the Seizure Foundation. I said no, because in effect, what you're doing is you're joining those people who are negative to force us to change who we are. And so I have epilepsy, period. And I'm not ashamed of it. And so I think the way to handle this is for us to be open, for us to acknowledge who we are and help other people be open as well.
Thanks very
I was
much.
gonna,
I'm
yeah,
going to turn it back to Marty, but as Marty said, I'm the chair of the Seniors Caucus, and as Karen has said, I think there's great opportunity politically to bring us together and focus on
yeah,
these issues. Because as
yeah.
you know, seniors have the biggest turnout, the highest turnout, the highest whatever in terms of voting. So I think there's a great opportunity. And sorry, I'm going to turn it back. I just want to say, forgive me, Sarah, but this has all been very inspiring. So, Marnie, I turn
It's,
it back to you for the
yeah,
last question.
I know
Thanks.
it's a fight not to use that word sometimes. Um, So uh, I personally think what you just said is a great place to leave off, but I wanted to ask one more really a quick one, if we can, if possibly do this quickly. But if you can think of one person, one thing that could be done so that people are brought up with a different awareness and attitude. The children are our future. I could sing it, but you wouldn't like that. What 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 do you think is the secret to success for raising a, a compassionate child?
Well, I'll start off by saying that I think a lot, and I do this very openly in a lot of speeches I make. I think that parents, and you're talking about parents, if I understand, Marty, what you're saying,
Yes, yes,
parents have a tendency to handicap their children. And the reason is that they love them so much that they don't want to let them experience life like other people do. And it's a huge problem. That is what happened with my family. They loved me. I didn't have any doubt about that. But I didn't respect them for them trying to limit what I can and cannot do. And so I just think this is a huge issue of not loving us so much that you handicap us. And I don't know what else to say. And I know those are strong words, but I believe it strongly. And I think in every culture we know that, we see that, and so forth.
I loved I love what you said, Tony, and I think um going back to the parents' point, and this is where I talk to a lot of parents, and parents also need the support system or need the infrastructure in the system to be able to um with the right tools and resources so they're able to bring the right kind of narrative and space within their whole household for their kids with disabilities. Every single kid and every single person, there's one common thing that we share is that we share the desire to be seen, heard, and valued. And I do remember meeting this kid once in one of the countries I worked in. He was 12 years old at the time, never been to school. Parents abandoned him when he was a kid. Grandparents want to find a way to get rid of him. And this was all because he was born blind. And it's heartbreaking. And I think for us, the more that we approach every single person and every single kid, that this kid has something beautiful to contribute to the world. Let's uncover that. Let's break down barriers so they're able to bring that forward. I think if we approach every single person with that narrative and that mindset, there's so much will be shifted. I know that sounds so cliche and so cheesy, but it's actually, if we think about it, we do approach each other from certain assumptions. But the more that we can approach each other with this lens that this person has something beautiful to contribute, it will shift a lot of the narrative.
The
Yeah.
only thing I would end up with, Marnie, is that each and every one of us is different. And those of us with a disability have something different than other people. But each and every one of us, if you have a disability or don't have a disability, each and every one of us has ability. And we should respect people for their ability instead of looking at them in a negative way.
Yeah. Well, couldn't agree more with that. I can't even tell you how great it is that you all gave up your time to be with us today. It's been amazing. And I'm going to actually let Steve, if you're there, I think you are. Steve Nardi is the vice chair of Democrats Abroad and has spent a lot of time back there in Washington. And he was going to close up for us, and I think he'd probably want to say thank you as well. So I'm going to watch for Steve unmuting. There he goes.
And Marnie, I don't know. I just sent you a note because I have to get on
Oh,
the road to this memorial. So
oh,
I'm driving now. But I will say thank you both very much to Sarah and to Congressman Coelho for your time today. This has been a very informative conversation. But Marnie, I will leave it to you then for the closing
okay.
remarks. Sorry, the
Okay.
timing, traffic's picked
It,
up, so I'm going to be
yeah.
late.
Well, I'm glad you were able to be here for,
So am I.
yeah. Yeah. So,
Do you want me to, do you want
yeah,
me to
would you
do
do
it?
that? Would you do that?
I
Yeah.
will, I will try if I can figure out.
So thank you both again. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you both for joining us today. We're deeply grateful to both of you, Sarah Minkara and Congressman Tony Coelho, for your invaluable contributions over the years and for sharing your time with us. Our lives are better because of your efforts. I want to encourage each of you on this call and those tuning in later. We encourage each of you to reach out within and beyond the DA membership overseas to assist potential voters with disabilities. Together, we can significantly impact both federal and state races. If you need support in this effort, please contact us at disabilitycaucus@democratsabroad.org. As we know, the midterm elections in 2026 are our opportunity to turn around both the House and the Senate. And I think the election results in Tennessee last night prove that we certainly can do this. And we need to provide a counterbalance to the actions of the current administration. I think we've shared the Vote from Abroad link in the chat box where you can find essential information and tools. Again, it's votefromabroad, all one word, .org. It's all the information you need to get you started on voting. In addition, consider volunteering with us. Everyone has something to offer, and you can find more information here at democratsabroad.org/volunteer or reach out directly at disabilitycaucus@democratsabroad.org. Or if I could put a plug in, or at Seniors Caucus at democratsabroad.org. Whether you have only a few hours now and then or are able to dedicate more of your time, we welcome your support. And we would love for you to join the caucus. And the link again is in the chat box, but it's Global Disability Caucus Sign Up Democrats Abroad. If you can, I don't know if anybody can follow that. And again, I just want to point out again, because we're political. We are the party of inclusion. And I hate to say it, but the other people have become the party of exclusion as they reinforce every day in every way. Your support is vital. If you can, visit our donations page. It's democratsabroad.org/donate. It's linked in the chat. And if you're able, please help us continue hosting events like this Global Disability Caucus, which has its own donation page on the donate site. Again, a huge thank you to our guests, Sarah Minkara and Congressman Tony Coelho, and the volunteers who made this possible. A recording will be sent to all of you and will also be available on YouTube as well. Please share it with your networks. That's how we expand the vote. Thank you again for helping us create a more accessible and welcoming Democrats abroad. Take care. We hope to be with you again soon. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for having us. We
Thank
appreciate it.
you. Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah. And Joel, I think we're
Turn off.
good.
So I want to offer my own thanks to everybody. And we will now be ending the recording. And the live broadcast. And yes, thanks again for a really great, really informative session.